All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lisa Partida with Home in LA, and today's workshop is presented by Tom Fuentes with Bank of Hope. And today's topic is going to be making housing decisions. So basically, I'll hand it over to Tom. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so tonight we're going to talk about making housing decisions. We're going to talk about buying and renting. I think kind of the main thing that I think maybe the biggest takeaway is going to be housing affordability, which is going to be crazy because I remember I started the week off talking to my youngest stepdaughter about this topic. And we were talking about like, okay, based on your income and your situation, what are the housing options that you have presented to you in the short term, maybe in 2026, and the longer term in the next year. And it's just funny that this is our topic this week because I just got off this conversation. And one of the things that we kind of talked about was how do you actually calculate what you can afford? So we're going to talk about that along with some other things, but that's kind of like my main takeaway, considering kind of where we're at with how unaffordable purchasing is. But we're going to talk about buying and renting. So let's look at our key takeaway from, again, what are my options? So the key takeaway from section one, we're covering three sections today. There's different types of housing. Prioritize your options starts by defining what is safe and secure housing means to you. And essentially, the purchasing section in section one, and then the renting section in section three is gonna kind of cover the same things, but we'll do our best not to be super repetitive. But seriously, what is your priority when you think about prioritizing options like safety and security, right? Safe and secure can mean different things to different people. So for example, like people may define safe and secure as a home that is in a neighborhood with street lights and low crime. Others may define it as a home that's accessible that meets their needs. It just depends. We're all different people. We all have different uh, wants and desires. So in the participant guide on page three, I don't think we have it all listed here, but let me give you an idea. Because we're different and we have different priorities, we need to think, how would we describe safe and secure to us? And maybe like if I was filling out my chart right here, I would probably prioritize things like maybe crime statistics that can be available through a simple Google search. Um, one of the other things may be something like proximity to certain emergency services. So, have we thought about things like whether it be buying or purchasing, making sure that we're close to something like the nearest police station, the nearest fire station, right? And that's kind of topical right now because there's like nine separate fires going on in California right now. Being closer to emergency services could prioritize how fast um, the response is to whatever emergency you have. What about being close to things like emergency services is concerned to healthcare? Where's the nearest hospital to you? Maybe those are the kind of things that I would fill in my box in the participant guide. Um, but please, after the workshop, think about what is safe and secure and fill that out. Um, because there could be a lot of different things. But let's go over some of the other kind of things that we have here. We don't have the full chart, but let's talk about it. Safe neighborhood, right? We already kind of gave the generalized low crime street light kind of scenario. What about the affordability aspect of it? What neighborhoods, what communities have affordable cost of living? And when we say affordable cost of living, we don't just mean how much your rent or how much your mortgage is, but how about the things that are around you that you're going to have to go to? The local grocery store, what is it? Is it an Aldi? Is it a Vaughn's? Things like that. Consider how much things are going to cost around you. The diversity of neighborhoods in terms of culture, ethnicity, ages, and things like that. You know, and then as you can see in the participant guide, you can prioritize these by need, wants, not important, or ensure. Strong disability community and disability related services. What about the school district? What does the school district look like? Sidewalks, distance to work, childcare, other services. How far are your friends and family? We kind of already covered it close to healthcare providers, but not only the major hospital. What about urgent care, um, places that you may need to get a referral to, things like that. Accessible parking. Maybe you live in the city and in a downtown area, and parking is going to be a priority. And then another thing that we're going to go into more detail is like, well, what is the space look like to you? Are you going to rent a room in a house? Are you going to have your own bathroom? Are you going to rent out your own apartment? Are you going to purchase a condo? Things like that. So consider your space. Also in here for additional things, affordable utilities, what does that look like? Are you renting in a place that comes fully furnished? Are you purchasing in a place that's fully furnished? Things like that. But anyway, this will give you kind of an idea of what to anticipate when you go to page 4 of the participant guide. So, the debate of what is better, renting or buying. I mean, I don't think anything is better. We've already identified the fact that we're all different people. We have a whole bunch of different wants and desires based on our situations. So it's going to be unique to where we find ourselves in our current state, right? So renting and buying are not the only options to consider when you're thinking about a place to call home. You might also be able to consider living with friends or relatives rent free, or sticking with your current housing choice that you have right now, whatever that is. For purposes that we have here, this allows us to brainstorm and think about things to consider in the grand scheme of what would be better for us in a scenario of renting or buying. So, reasons for renting. Repairs and maintenance are usually the responsibility of the property owner. Um, excuse me, sorry, I'm still getting over a cold. Um, you might not have to spend time making repairs or tending to the yard, for example. Whoops. The rental may already have accessibility accommodations that you may need, such as lower countertops or accessible hallways, for example. You may have access to amenities like workout facilities or a pool. You might have to, you might have a deal where some of the utilities are included or you only pay for a part of them, right? You might have, you may not have to buy furniture because the place that you're renting comes fully furnished. Who knows, right? You might not have to buy appliances because the rental may provide appliances for you. Um, One of the things actually that's really important that came up in a podcast I was listening to about a month or so ago was in the pro column for renting. You can have more autonomy and agency on whether or not you want to stay there. And what do I mean by that? You have flexibility if you're renting. I would argue, this is my opinion based on what I was listening to. You can move to another place more easily if you're renting than if you bought. So you remain flexible. For example, say you signed a lease for an apartment and you ended up getting a brand new job opportunity that pays way more money across town, a few cities away. But it would require you to break the lease, pay the penalty because now you're going to get more money at a new job, but you have to rent a different apartment because you don't want an hour or 2 hour commute. So I would argue that by renting, you have more flexibility. When you're purchasing a property, you're kind of locked in. Um, and the argument that was being made in the podcast was simply due to market considerations, because you're priced in at what you paid for, if you ended up getting a job opportunity, say you bought a house in LA, but a job opportunity came up in Nashville, Tennessee. If you just bought your home, How easy is it to sell it? You still have to put it on the market. You have to go through that whole thing. You have to pay closing costs, uh, um, realtor fees, all that. So I would argue put a plus in the rental column, your flexibility, depending on what you want to do with your job, your schooling, things like that, things to consider. Um, a pro in the rental column, the upfront cost is cheaper because you may only have to come up with the first month's rent and a security deposit compared to a 20% down payment if you're buying a house, or even a 3% down payment that would be required if you got an FHA loan, for example. Also, pros in the rental column, things that you don't have to worry about in buying. You don't have to pay property taxes. You don't have to pay homeowners insurance. There's other types of insurance that you have to pay if you're renting. Maybe you want rental insurance. We'll get into that a little bit later. But, you know, the rental payments might be lower than your potential mortgage if you were to purchase. Um, so that's kind of the pros in the rental on the rental side. What about reasons for buying though? Reasons for buying, quite simply, you could build equity. It's not guaranteed, of course. I don't know. I haven't paid attention too much to the housing market as of late. I don't know if it's flat right now, but it's not guaranteed that you're going to build equity. Um, yeah, one of the arguments, I guess, is that if you do have a little bit of equity, you can borrow against it in the form of like a home equity line of credit. Um, so yeah, that's an advantage, I guess. You might pay less in federal state income tax because you can use your house as a tax write-off. Um, I would argue that still the dream that we hear owning your own home, I would still say, yeah. I mean, maybe it is still the American dream or whatever that cliche or the saying is. I mean, I still think that that's a thing, right? A place to call home to lay your head, a place that you own. I would put it in the pro column. Um, Someone argued that when you're purchasing, you're investing in the community. I mean, that kind of goes back to kind of what we talked about earlier with the identifying the important factors to you. Um, in the whoops, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. When we're considering the needs, wants, importance, purchasing could be the investing into the community in a community that you want your kids to go to school with, that you may work in, that you may have a job in, that you frequent, that you go out to eat at, that you go patronize and things like that. Um, in some instances, your mortgage payment could be lower than the rent. It just depends on the market that you find yourself in too. I guess one advantage in the pro column for owning your own home would be that if you have the ability to get a fixed mortgage, like a 30-year fixed mortgage, that your payment wouldn't vary. Your rental payment could vary because the landlord year over year could increase the rents. That wouldn't happen if you had a fixed rate mortgage. Um, Maybe something that you would put in the plus column is that because you own the home, you could decorate it the way you want. You could paint the walls, you could do construction, you could do whatever you want. You couldn't do that if you rented a condo or a townhome, for example. Anyway, so there's a lot of factors to consider um, into the decision-making process, not just like how much I can afford, which I promise we will get into, but there's other things in the decision tree that we need to consider as well. In the next try it section of the participant guide on page 7, for each situation, identify the details that are relevant to the person's decision about buying a house. So based on what we talked about and based on your own thoughts, it takes 5 minutes to complete this exercise after the workshop. Um, Trisha plans to attend nursing school soon. She wants to stay in her community and work at the local hospital, excuse me. She lives with her parents in the home that she grew up in. Anyway, what we have here, and I don't think we have every scenario, but there's going to be a few different scenarios that you're going to read. There's one with Trisha. There's one with Sydney, whose job requires him to move to a new city every 2 to 3 years. There's a scenario with a family that has children. Anyway, check out the different scenarios. This may kind of unlock some of the ideas that we kind of talked about within the scenarios presented in the participant guide. And then you can write down the factors that may affect the housing decisions based on the scenarios that are presented. Um, and then, excuse me, in the on page 9 in the next apply it section, important factors I want to consider in renting and buying. You can use the space to write down important factors that you want to consider as you decide the pros and cons as far as renting or buying a place that you want to call home. Important factors I want to consider in deciding to rent. Um, so go ahead and check that out, and you can fill out the worksheet there. And then also on page 10, you will be answering the questions to consider whether you want to pursue renting or buying. Keep it in mind that neither renting or buying may be options for you right now. There may be other options available to you as well, such as living with friends or relatives without paying rent. And in here, we have uh, questions, your answers in the scenario, or at least something to think about. And for example, question 1, how long do you think you may be staying in the area? Excuse me. Generally, the longer you plan to stay, the more advantages you get from buying. We kind of already talked about this. Remember to consider job opportunities and stability as well as community or family connections. These can affect the amount of time that you stay in the area. Do you enjoy home maintenance, yard work, and decorating? Right? Taking care of a home takes time. I know for the scenario when my oldest stepsister ended up moving out years and years ago, one of the things that we talked about that she was like, Tom, I don't want to I don't care about the front yard, backyard thing. I'm not going to be mowing and doing things like that. She's like, I'm going to live in the city. And sure enough, that's what ended up happening. And, her and her boyfriend ended up renting an apartment where they didn't have to deal with that. Um, yeah, so it's all just scenario based. Um, yeah, so in this section, we have scenarios like considering these kind of options of whether or not you would buy or rent. Um, and then on page 14 of the participant guide in the apply it my housing options, the following list explains different housing options. Check those that you think might be options for you now. And in this section, there's a whole host of different options. For example, in the renting, we have if renting is the option for you, excuse me, sorry, um, you can rent a room in an apartment or a home. Um, you can rent an apartment yourself. Maybe a scenario you found that you have the ability to rent an entire house yourself. And essentially, we go through to identify, the pros and cons with each. Um, those are the scenarios that we would consider in the renting, in the renting, right? So rent a room, an apartment, a house, privately owned subsidized housing. You may have the opportunity to take advantage of public housing, for example, as well. And then options for buying could include things like single family home. Um, Maybe you want to buy a modular home, a prefab home, or a townhouse. You have the option that you may want to buy a condominium or a condo instead of a larger property. Maybe a house isn't for you. I would consider one scenario with these options in buying really quick. Let's cover. One thing that you have to remember if you're buying like the townhome or the condo part of it, there could be a homeowners association fee associated with it. So you'd want to check out if there's condominium association dues or not that could add on to the total amount of your mortgage if you were to purchase. You can buy a unit in a co-op, for example, too, which is a little bit different than a condo. You can lease a unit and you are a shareholder in the co-op that owns the entire property. But remember, not all communities are co-ops, so it's a very specific thing. You can buy a manufactured or a mobile home. Excuse me. This is a home that's generally built in a factory and then taken to a property to be assembled where it'll be permanently. It may be on a metal frame or a permanent foundation. Yeah, so there's a whole host of different things. But really, I wanted to consider section one to be, let's be considerate of the difference between renting and buying and the whole different host of options that we could prioritize as things that are important to us, more than just the affordability portion of it. But now let's more specifically go into the dollars and cents of things. So let's list costs associated with housing options and then estimate how much we can afford, which goes back to that conversation that started my week and talking to my youngest stepdaughter about what you can actually afford, what the industry standard is, and what the financial experts want you to be at. And I wish with the unaffordability crisis that we deal with right now that the percentage would be higher, but it's really not. But we'll go into the mathematics of it. Key takeaway, an affordable payment for housing is one that you can reliably make each month. The whole idea with deciding on what you can afford, whether it be a rental or for purchase, is you not overextending, you living within the means that you find yourself in currently. Only you can decide what's affordable to you. Landlords, mortgage lenders are not the ones that can tell you what you can afford. And I kind of always bring this up when we talk about this topic years and years and years and years and years back when my wife and I bought our home. Um, we ended up getting pre-approved for way more money than we ever could have afforded at that time that we purchased the home. It was, in hindsight, now that I know more than I knew then, is I would consider myself more financially literate, let's say. I cannot believe the astronomical money amount of money that we got pre-approved to buy a house. There is no way we could have afforded it. No way, knowing the struggles that we had and just making the mortgage payment for the house that we ended up buying. It's crazy. Anyway, I say that to tell you that more than likely you could potentially get pre-approved to purchase a house that's more than you can afford. Only you know what you can afford. Don't let anyone tell you. And with that said, we have this scenario in the participant guide on page 20 with Pat and Sam and estimating what they can actually afford. And this is where we're going to get into the dollars and cents of it. Check out this specific scenario we have. Sam and Pat have been saving. They've got 10,000 set aside. They also have a little bit of money set aside for emergency because they have an emergency plan too, or an emergency savings fund set aside. Together, they make 48,000 a year in annual gross income, and then their net income after taxes and deductions 42,000. They heard a quick way to estimate what they could, which would could be affordable, is to take their combined annual gross income and multiply it by three. They also heard about another quick way to estimate affordability and monthly housing costs. These costs should be no more than 30% of your annual gross income. And I'm really here to say it. Unfortunately, it's kind of like the industry standard still. Um, I still hear a lot of other financial experts have pushed this number to the 40 and 50% column because we quite literally are in an unaffordability scenario. Housing costs too much if it's rental or for purchase. So those numbers have been extended a bit, but I still live by the 30% rule. Let's look to see what that looks like. And we're going to use the scenario for Pat and Sam. So let's start by thinking about Pat and Sam's scenario and estimate how much they can afford using the two methods. So method one takes annual gross income and multiplies it by three to estimate the highest home purchase price that you can afford. Your annual gross income is what you make each year before any taxes or deductions are taken out. Um, excuse me. Uh, so Pat and Sam multiplied their annual gross income of 48,000 by three to get to 144,000. So using the first method, Pat and Sam should look for a house that has a purchase price up to 144,000. This method may help if you're going to look at houses to buy. However, the method really doesn't help if you're trying to estimate the potential affordability of a monthly payment if you're going to be renting. So it would help to consider method two. But really, the multiple of three or the whole 30% affordability is kind of the gold standard that we're gonna kind of use. Um, despite the just the unaffordability that we're going through. So let's talk about method two. Method two multiplies monthly gross income by 0.30 to estimate the most you should pay in monthly housing costs. Monthly housing costs include your rent or mortgage payments plus required insurance, utilities, maintenance, and repairs. This is based on the traditional rule that the monthly housing cost shouldn't be more than 30% of your monthly gross income. So in the scenario that we have with Pat and Sam, method two uses monthly gross income. So the scenario only lists their annual gross income. So little math is involved in the scenario. Pat and Sam divided their monthly gross income of 48,000 by 12 months to get their monthly gross income of $4,000. They then multiplied 4,000 by 0.03 excuse me, 0.30 to get $1,200. So using the second method, the estimate for Pat and Sam's total monthly housing cost shouldn't exceed more than $1,200. So it needs to be 1,200 or less. So depending on the housing market, this estimate may not be realistic or helpful, but it kind of still ends up being kind of the gold standard that we have. And then there's a third method too. The method isn't quick, but maybe more realistic. You can look at your monthly income and expenses to estimate an affordable housing payment. You add up your income, subtract your non-housing expenses, and see what's left over to cover all housing costs. So with Pat and Sam's scenario, on page 22 in the participant guide, their spending and savings plan is broken out into three sections: their net income, non-housing expenses, and then the comparison of what's left for housing costs. Most of the spending in the savings plan has been completed in the participant guide, but there are some blank sections that need to be filled out. I don't think we have it. Do we have? Oh, we do have. Yeah, we do have it. Excuse me. Um, so anyway, the correct answer in the scenario is that the number that they end up having is $1,140 left for the calculation. Um, so we have Pat and Sam's total net income. You can see in the table here that the total income is 3,500. Um, excuse me. And then you can see that when we do the activity in the participant guide, the total non-housing expenses is $2,360. And this I don't think we have the list of things here, but look, of the $2,360, we have things like the emergency fund that they have set aside of $50, charitable contributions of $100, their cell phone bill of $200, their internet bill of $60, their car payment of $300, their car insurance of $70, their fuel costs of 107. So anyway, every single one of these adds up to the total of 2,360. So once we have the calculation done, you can see in the table here that we're going to take their total monthly net income of 3,500. We're going to subtract their total non-housing expenses of 2,360. And then you can see that we're left with a total housing cost of $1,140. So this means that their total non-housing expenses are that amount. So you can see that we can use these three different methods to come up with different dollar amounts, if you will, and different ways to calculate what would be considered affordable to us based on our current situation. And then pay on page 25 of the participant guide in the apply section, we have estimating what I can afford. One of the other topics that we cover in the financial literacy lessons that we do is coming up with your spending and savings plan, which is just kind of a fancy way of saying, what your budget is. Um, you can use the information from your pay stub and other financial statements to make up your spending and savings plan. But in order to do the calculations that we have, it would be important for you to set that up. Um, so in the three sections in the participant guide, I'm sorry that we don't have it, but check it out on page 25 after the workshop. The spending and savings plan has three sections: my net income, my non-housing expenses, and the comparison like we did with Sam and Pat for what's left off for the housing costs. Um, Once you establish the spending and savings plan, you can convert this into using method three to find out the affordability for you. Um, so it kind of kills what's the saying? Well, anyway, you get the advantage of doing two things simultaneously, right?
Killing two birds with one stone.
Boom. I couldn't remember. Oh my God. I've been telling everyone at work, well, heck, even my wife, and when I'm talking to people, man, I've like been sick for a week and a half and I got brain fog. Like even the simplest things aren't coming to me. Thanks, Lisa.
You're
But yeah,
welcome.
you have the ability here to do two things at the same time. One, create your spending and savings plan, and then coming up with the ability to come up with a third method of calculation for affordability. But I wish, I mean, after completing the section that I could say that we would want your housing costs to be at 40 or 50%. But man, it really eats in the ability to save, to think about things like other financial goals that you may have, like schooling, I mean, heck, feeding yourself. I mean, just it's crazy, right? But we really kind of want to use that rule of three still, if we can. Um, well, I think, yeah, we still have some time. We're not going to go too heavy into this because we're kind of considering same things that this is a bit repetitive, but what's next if you decide to rent? Um, So I guess the key takeaway for this is like read and understand a rental agreement, explain the purpose of renter's insurance if that's probably something that you would want to get, and identify rights and responsibility as a renter. Um, but really like we kind of discussed the in section one, like why we would want to rent or whatever, but this is more kind of like finding out ways to protect yourself as a renter if you decide that that was the best thing for you. So steps in renting that we kind of need to consider. Figure out, where you want to live. I mean, this is going to be easy when you consider what we talked about in section one, right? Figure out what kind of place you want to rent. Figure out what you can afford by going over section two and the stuff in the participant guide and the apply it in the try it sections. Understand your credit and how that could affect your rent. So it's going to be very important for you to understand what your credit score is and pulling your credit report from the three credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. Um, Understand, how the credit's going to affect your renting options. Research your options too. Get your first month's rent and deposit together, and then read and understand the lease or rental agreement. Um, and then again, in kind of thinking about these as subcategories, figuring out where you want to live, safety and security. Is it close to public transportation? How far is it from work, childcare, medical services, and other services that you need? How close is it to friends and family? The school scenario, what's the school district look like? Is there parks and playgrounds around? Accessibility for features with people who have disabilities and things like that. In step two, figuring out what kind of place you want to rent. In the apply it section on section one, page 14 in the participant guide, we kind of already covered this idea, which is, are you going to rent a room? Are you going to rent a condo, a townhouse, things like that? Um, you can go back and consider these things when you're talking about figuring out what type of place that you want to rent. Figuring out what you can afford. We kind of already talked about that in section two. But on page 25 in the participant guide, use that spending and savings plan that you did in the third method that we talked about to figure out what's left for the housing cost in that scenario. Um, and then step four in understanding how credit affects what you can rent. Pulling that free credit report is going to be very important to understand how your credit score is going to affect the type of rental that you may have access to. Low credit scores or credit reports with negative information are going to be important. Um, Spend more time looking for a rental, have fewer choices of rentals. It could mean living in a less desirable rental if you have these things that you're trying to combat in the form of low credit score and negative comments on your credit reports. You may have to pay a larger deposit. Um, you may have to get a letter of guarantee or someone to co-sign on a rental potentially. Yeah, so think about how the credit would affect scenario step number four. Step five, research. You may want to go to the internet and search different rental options and availability within the communities that you're looking to use. I mean, you could potentially use a real estate agent. I don't know how cost effective that would be because you're going to have to pay the fees associated to that, but I would say it's probably best to just do your due diligence. Get your first month's rent and deposit together. You're generally going to have to pay the first month's rent before you move in. You may also need to pay a security deposit before you move in as well. Um, some rentals may also require you to pay an amount equal to at least the last month's rent before you move in. You may also have to pay other fees up front, such as amenity fees or application fees. So anyway, it's important to get your financial ducks in a row when considering what the rental scenario is going to be. And then read and understand your lease and rental agreement to understand what you're signing up for between you and the landlord or the property owner. It's important, and it may sound obvious, but it's important to read the fine print, if you will. In page 32 of the participant guide in the try it section, it takes about 5 minutes to complete. Um, but we have reading a rental agreement, and I don't think we have all of the things here, but there's basically like 8 key points that we need to consider. We see four here. Who are the parties on the lease? Um, where is the property? You know, the address of the property specifically. What parts of the property do you have access to? Do you have a driveway, a garage, front porch, backyard? Is it the first floor of the home? Is it the second story of an apartment? Things like this to consider. What do you have access to appliance wise too? Dishwasher, refrigerator, stones, stove, oven, so on and so forth. How much is the rent? What are you going to owe on a monthly basis? Uh, when is the rent considered late? What happens if you pay it late? How long is the lease that you're signing up for? What's the process for getting repairs done? And then are there any rules considered if you had guests, for example? And then on page 35 in the participant guide, we have my lease or rental agreement checklist. So we kind of already talked about the specific things here, but go through and check out the checklist to consider each thing in more detail that we kind of verbally covered. Um, and then on page 38 in the participant guide, we have a little bit more in the form of understanding your renter's insurance, which yet is another way to protect yourself and not only educating yourself before signing on the dotted line for whatever rental you're going to get, but understanding how insurance can protect you as a renter as well. Um, and this is an important scenario if something bad happens, like whether there's a fire or a theft that occurs. Could you afford to replace your personal property if something like this was to happen? What about if a visitor were injured at your residence? Could you afford to pay for the expenses resulting from a visitor's injury, for example? Renter's insurance helps you financially recover from losses to your personal possessions due to hazard or disaster specifically listed in the insurance policy. The hazards and disasters that insurance covers are known as named perils. This could be things like burglary, fire, smoke, vandalism, theft, explosion, scenarios that from weather, including like, I don't know, water damage from floods or things like that. Renter's insurance does not cover the physical building because remember that's the property owner's responsibility. Renter's insurance can also protect you if someone who doesn't live in your rented home claims to have been injured while visiting. Renter's insurance can cover the actual cost of the items lost that are damaged or the replacement cost of items as well. It's important to keep good records of things in case you have to put in an insurance claim on things that you're trying to get covered. Um, There's actually an inventory checklist that can be found at insuranceonline.org if this is something that you would want to use uh, for things that you might be able to get covered through renter's insurance. Um, but I would say the last thing that we always talk about too is shop around for a policy that is more advantageous to you, not only with what the monthly cost would be, but the amount of coverage that you would get. And then remember that you have rights as a renter. The Fair Housing Act is the federal law that protects you from discrimination when renting, buying, or securing financing for a home. The Fair Housing Act prohibits housing related discrimination based on a whole host of different factors, such as race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, presence of children, which is sometimes called familial status. You have the right to housing that meets health and safety codes. For example, the roof shouldn't leak, the plumbing should work, and there shouldn't be any exposed wires, right? Um, there's also no reasonable modifications. A resident with a disability is permitted by federal law to make and pay for reasonable modifications to the interior of an apartment building or common spaces of the building. A reasonable modification is a structural modification made to allow people with disabilities the full enjoyment of the housing and related facilities. For example, widening a doorway, lowering kitchen cabinets, or replacing flooring to accommodate wheelchair accessibility, for example. Housing providers are required by federal law to make reasonable accommodations. Um, all rights come with responsibilities, things that you must do also. You have the right to electricity in your apartment. If something goes wrong, you have the right to have the repairs made in a timely fashion by the landlord. You have the responsibility to keep the house clean, however, perform everyday maintenance and things like that, to take care of the place that you're renting. Um, uh, Also, you can get help if you think that your rights have been violated. Visit the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development or HUD's website at www.hud.gov. Navigate to the section for renters for links for general and state-specific information. You can also consult your local public housing authority or HUD-approved housing counseling agency for legal services from organizations at no cost to you as well. That actually brings us to our section close and our workshop close. Um, I would say that one of the things that we kind of forget about in trying to make housing decisions, because we're kind of always thinking about the affordability portion of it as far as like what I can afford. But there's a whole bunch of factors that I sure as heck didn't consider when we purchased our house. We were just trying to get close enough to the school district that we needed to be in for the kids. I mean, the last thing on my mind was like, where's the closest park or the nicest park? Um, so I would consider even before the affordability portion, if we take section one seriously, if I'm fortunate enough to be given the opportunity to move in the future, I'm going to consider section one and make a checklist for myself before I even consider affordability. Because things change for you importance wise as you get older. Um, Proximity to parks and amenities right now is super high on my list because I have grandchildren now and I want to take them to a nice park that has a nice swing set and things like that. Not anything I probably would have considered 20 years ago when I was like in my 20s. Um, and then we consider the affordability piece, the whole like kind of 30% thing to consider of affordability, which I wish wasn't kind of the gold standard, but I think it is, even though it's so hard to stay within the threshold because rent and mortgage payments are so astronomical. Anyway, if we have any questions, happy to answer, but I hope this kind of helps a little bit in trying to understand housing decisions. Um, but we do 2 financial literacy workshops a month. Um, but I hope this kind of helps with the housing affordability question.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Lisa.
Sorry. So yeah, I don't know if anybody has any questions, but if you do, feel free to unmute yourselves now. Oh,
Oh, I see a
somebody.
question. Does Bank of Hope help single mothers? Anything specifically? Banking, mortgages?
Hi, my name is
CD?
Esmeralda. Yes, just basically anything that would help me to get closer to my goal.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, no worries. So what would you consider like kind of, because when we think about goals, we kind of think of them in um we use the acronym SMART, specific, measured, measurable. I have brain fog right now. I'm missing my acronyms. Action oriented, reachable, and time bound. So, what would you consider to be like kind of goal number one?
Goal number one would be yes, safety, community, where looking at, and yes, affordability more than anything.
So, is this kind of in deciding for your housing decision purposes?
Yes, because honestly, I don't want to rent no more.
Okay, I got you. I think the first step that we didn't even talk about, kind of in the grand scheme of housing decisions specifically, would be um, coming up with a hierarchical idea of how to think about the goal. Meaning, if you're going to rent or purchase, I think the first thing we need to consider before we even have that first month's deposit or our 3% down payment if we did like an FHA loan and purchasing or a 20% traditional down payment,
Uh-huh.
do we have an emergency fund set up?
No, not at all.
So that's kind of what I kind of want to think about it in building up steps first before tackling what I would consider the monumental task of the housing decision, whether it be renting or buying.
Okay, sounds good.
So what I would consider kind of first priority would be um, setting aside money for an emergency fund. It could be $100, it could be $1,000, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Once we have that money set aside, then we can I kind of do it like in baby step mode.
Mm-hmm.
Once we have that established, what's our next goal? I mean, maybe even before the emergency fund. I know specifically you asked, like specifically, does Bank of Hope have anything specific? that could be helpful. But
Hmm.
I would say, do you have a checking account? Do you
I
have
do.
access to banking services and things like that?
I
Are
do
they
have one.
accessible? Um, so I would kind of take that layered approach
Mhm.
before diving in head first to the housing decision.
Okay.
Having banking services be accessible and affordable to you in the form of a low cost or no cost checking account, savings account, setting aside money for an emergency fund. Once we've established that, then we're probably talking about doing that spending and savings plan that we talked about in section two, because
Hmm.
it's going to allow you to visually see what debts you have.
Right. Okay.
Do you owe money? Do you have credit card debt? Do you have student loan debt? Do you have any other outstanding debts? Getting the
No.
totals
Hmm.
and then knowing how much you have to pay to that. Because remember, in order to calculate housing affordability based on method three, you need to figure out what you have left over after your income and after your expenses. So kind of take that layered approach first before tackling the housing decision. The good thing is that this specific workshop in the participant guide is going to give you what you need to do those three things I talked about. So you kind of have the ability to dive into at least getting started and then getting to that step, which might be number four goal, doing the affordability on what you can rent or what you can buy. Does that kind of make sense in the baby step idea of what I'm presenting?
Yes, it does. Thank you for helping.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else that I can add on to that, or maybe something? I mean, I think that's kind of a good layered approach to get started. Getting started is the hardest thing. $25 in a savings account for an emergency fund, $50 in it for an emergency fund. But I like to start there first, then look at our debts and our expenses and calculating that total. And then we can talk about how much we can afford to rent or how much we can afford to pay for a mortgage. Um, yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yes, it is. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Tom.
My pleasure, Esmeralda. Thank you for your question. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right. If anybody else doesn't have any questions, I guess we'll go ahead and close out. And thank you again, Esmeralda, for your questions. And then you can also, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if sorry if I'm repeating this, but you can also like just search up online. They also have like first-time home buyer programs as well, and they can also kind of help you like walk you through the process as to how to prepare to take that next step. So
Yeah, so
yeah, and
great.
obviously, thank you, Tom, for all that advice. Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Check out HUD certified housing counseling agencies. They will help you out for either scenario for renting or buying.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yep. All right. Thanks,
All right, you
Lisa.
guys. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Tom. Bye.
All right. Have a good
Thank you,
night. Bye.
Lisa.